Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chrissie Mayr podcast. We are on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And if you're listening to us right now on iTunes, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. I appreciate all the reviews you guys have left so far. Quick shout out to a couple of my upcoming stand-up dates. I'm going to be doing stand-up with comedians of the compound at the Blue Claw Stadium in Lakewood, New Jersey next Friday. Wow, this is already, no, next Saturday, October 16th. Looking forward to that. And then I'll be headlining at Tiff's Ale House, also known as the Dojo of Comedy, November 6th, and that's in Morris Plains, New Jersey. We're working on a bunch of new dates with comedians of the compound and also just headlining by myself. So really excited to be doing as much stand-up as I can all over this country, as long as they're not requiring the jab. Woo! Quick shout out to our sponsor, Drom. We all know dating apps are terrible. They're superficial. You're swiping on faces. There are quote unquote expert matching apps. Both usually waste your time. The solution is values-based matching. If you're conservative, things probably aren't going to work out with someone who is a total lefty and vice versa. Same with religion, lifestyle, how to raise children, and other core values. Sure, anybody might change to meet you where you are, but why not just find the perfect match from the start? Drom is a new free values-based dating app. You pick your deal breakers and deal makers, and it's also video only for more human interaction. So go to Drom.Date/CMP in your phone's browser. Click the iOS or Google button to install and use the invite code CMP to sign up. If you're already matched up, if you already found the love of your life, good for you. Time to tell your single friends and get your partner to tell their friends. That's Drom.Date/CMP. Design and meet your perfect match. It's free to use. What have you got to lose? All right, guys. I'm so excited to have this gal on the pod today. I feel like we have been missing each other. Like this is what I love about social media is like we found each other through Instagram where I found her. And here we are. We went back and forth for a while, but we're doing it. We're doing it now. She is a nervous system expert. She is a somatic neuroplasticity practitioner. If you don't know what that is, guess what? Neither do I. We're going to find out. We're going to talk about all the things. Irene Lyon, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hello, Chrissy. I am good. I'm good. Yes, it's been a while.
It has been. And I'm so happy that we found each other through Instagram because I find what you do is so interesting. And I think a lot of it applies to what a lot of us have been going through the last year and a half. You deal with, and I'm a big I started going to therapy, just talk therapy, when I found out my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And through that, I kind of found out, I went into therapy thinking, oh, I have daddy issues. Like clearly I'm in stand up, but I
Is that
learned
the
that
connection? Sorry.
what?
Is that the connection? Stand up means daddy issues? I had never.
It kind of does. I was for many years, no, of course not. But I'm finding that it's more and more apparent. But, I kind of realized, I couldn't speak my real feelings growing
Yeah.
up. That's why stand-up really appealed to me. I could be honest. It was low stakes. I'm in front of strangers. I'll never see them again, which is so funny because it's the opposite of what I think is normal. It's like, the people you're close to get to know all about what's going on with your innermost feelings. But for me, a group of strangers was what I needed. And you deal a lot with kind of these themes and like stored up kind of shame and trauma. But you know what? You can probably explain it better than I can. If you want to just briefly explain like what you do, how you got into this work.
Yeah. Where should I start? What do you want? What are you curious? Because I could start with how I got into it. Let me know. Give me a.
Start with how you got into it.
Yeah. So I didn't grow up, or I wasn't little wanting to do this. It just sort of happened. Where I am now is very different than even 10 years ago. I was in private practice working with people one-on-one, but where it really started was in my teenage years. I was a ski racer, like I downhill skied a lot, and injured myself over and over again, which is another story in itself. But I had all these knee surgeries, from that. And I was studying in my 20s because of that, exercise science and fitness and applied human nutrition, like all the things health. And I had this injury that was a complication from another surgery. I actually broke my kneecap in half spontaneously walking down the stairs. It just broke right
I
apart.
read that. Oh, what a freak
And
accident that sounds like.
I had just had a surgery to repair an ACL, which is a anterior cruciate ligament of my knee. And I think what happened was there was a previous fracture on my kneecap from a mountain bike fall that was never diagnosed because I was mountain biking before you used pads, knee pads and elbow pads. Anyway, long story short, had that accident and wasn't getting better. Like the bone was healed and I was strong and I looked good. Everything was lined up, but I was in so much pain, like physical pain, tension. I was seeing massage and chiro and my physical therapist at the time, I was in Australia actually doing research work, said, I don't know what the heck's wrong with you. You've got to go see someone else who deals with this more mind-body neuroplasticity stuff. So I did. And that is going to sound crazy, but within 4 weeks, I was completely healed. Every pain, every tightness, I was light as a feather. I stopped doing all my exercises. I stopped stretching. So what I did, that was my entry point, and that was 01 into neuroplasticity, rewiring the body. And what that methodology was is called the Feldenkrais method. It sounds like a religion. It's not. It's someone's name.
It's a cult. No.
Yeah, well, sometimes it feels that way in some ways, but it's not. Moshe Feldenkrais, he's Israeli, Russian, Jew. Anyway, that blew my mind because I had just spent 7 years at university learning the hardcore sciences of rehab, physical fitness, and all of it, nothing helped. So I was like, fuck. And my poor parents who just spent all this money on education for me. So I decided to study that work, and it was mind-blowing and just body-blowing in a good way. And as a quick kind of example, what you teach someone or what someone learns in that methodology is how a baby would learn how to move and crawl and sit and stand. You go back to those roots. And so if you think about a child, they don't just come out of mom walking. They have to learn, and it takes a long time. And they're also not thinking, okay, I'm going to contract my core, and then I'm going to tighten this, and then they just do it intuitively in relationship to how they feel the environment. And of course, good, healthy interactions, that kind of thing, and freedom. And a lot of babies these days are put in these contraptions that limit their movement, and it actually influences their brain development. So I completely fell in love with the work, studied it for 4 years. This was now in 2004. Got my certificate, started practicing, blending in the fitness, was having really good results. And then in 2008, there was a summer where I was working with some folks, and about 30% of the people that I was working with, they weren't getting better with the thing that had helped me dramatically. And I kind of went, oh shit, what am I missing now? What is going on here? And what I realized, Chrissy, after looking at what happened that summer was these people that weren't getting better had some form of severe accident, like falling off of a cliff kind of thing.
Whoa.
One woman was in a propane explosion, so she was recovering. I know. So a terrible story.
I shouldn't be laughing. I'm just imagining a cartoonish scenario.
Like, what? Yeah. And so she was, recovering from 3rd-degree burns, and that is one of the more painful things to recover from. Another woman, and her story was kind of my breakthrough story of, whoa, this is really important. She came to me with frozen shoulder. I don't know if you know what that is.
No, it sounds like a dessert.
It does. It's not. It's so your shoulders, like as girls, we put bras on, we blow dry our hair, we hug our children,
we shimmy.
Right?
Yeah.
We do and so frozen shoulder, you can't do that. So if you wanted to like put something in your hair or tie whatever, you couldn't. Basically your shoulders are frozen. And people think that it's due to poor posture and something wrong with the shoulder. And while that's at the shoulder joint, It is often emotional and in the nervous system.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so I'll tell the story just for context because it's good. She was skiing because I was in a mountain town at the time, and she fell and she broke her ribs. And when you break ribs, it's really sore. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it hurts like hell. And so when you do that, you kind of stop moving your shoulders because you don't want to move your torso. And you stop breathing deeply because to fill up your lungs expands the ribs. And so she just got really still, really frozen in her body. And she ended up getting frozen shoulder on both shoulders. She went to the physios, the chiros, the massage, the acupunctures, nothing was helping. And so at that time, everyone wound up in my studio because I was the person that helped people with these tricky things. And I was like, oh man, this woman looks like she is a broken bird, like wings broken, can't fly. I won't go through all the details, but we worked together for almost 2 years. But what occurred to her when she was young was she was absolutely abused sexually, emotionally, to the point where we uncovered, and she knew this, but she didn't tell me this because I don't need to ask people's full histories. There was one point she was laying on my table because I was doing body work at the time and gentle stuff. And I said to her, I call her Grace. I was like, Grace, when you were abused and sexually mistreated, did you ever get tied down? Because it looked like as she was laying there that she was tied.
Wow. Like her body remembered the trauma.
Completely. And she looks at me, Chrissy, with these big, beautiful brown eyes. And she goes, well, of course I was.
Like you would know, like, yeah.
And so, what you have to do when you're good at this work is, okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. I'm glad I know that. And at this point, we had already done months and months of work. I had to reteach her how to breathe because anytime she would lay down, she would hold her breath. She was just terrified of speaking up.
How old was she?
Oh God, she was already a mother of 2. She was probably in her late 30s.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Ish. She wasn't 20 and she wasn't 60. She was somewhere in that career-based world. Anyway, and I was like, wow, okay. So what we started to play with was the trapped, we would call it in our world, procedural memory. So if someone's tying you down against your will, you have an innate response or innate unconscious, we call it autonomic nervous system response. You want to break free, right? Just like if the soccer ball is coming to your head, you're going to do that to try to protect it. Granted, you see it coming. And so she had trapped in her body all of this desire and fight. So we think of fight and flight. Most people know that. But then there's freeze.
Right, right. Those are the 3 responses.
The 3 Fs. And so she couldn't fight because she was super young. And she couldn't flee because she was also super young. And she was tied to the beds and trees. These people tied her to trees in the backyard. It was very cult-ish. It was just gross. And so her body never got to break free. It never got to flee. And so part of this somatic nervous system trauma work, it isn't just about talking it through and even feeling the emotions. A lot of people think my work is emotional work. That might come up, but what we're really looking at is the survival impulse that was never completed. And so with her permission, of course, I was like, do you want to try an experiment? Let's just try this. I'm going to, sit by your side and I'm going to put pressure on your arms. And she's like, yeah, she was so keen to do everything, right? Because she was in pain. And so we did that. I did that. And I said, okay, you have to now go back to that feeling of the trappedness and how you would, and I'm kind of speeding this up. And she's like, okay. And then she felt into it, what we would call the somatic experience of the rage. And I hate you, but also fear. And like a mama bear protecting her cub, she just roared her arms against mine. And that unlocked the frozen shoulder.
And you make it sound like this is so easy, and obviously this woman sounds like she was very open to, like, explore her
She
trauma,
was.
and she was it was accessible to her because it sounds like
Yeah.
she was very, like, wanted to heal, wanted to
Mhm.
dive in. And when we watch movies or, like, shows, it seems like you know, people like, oh, wake up in the middle of the night, like, oh, I was molested, or like when we see
Yeah.
like movies and TV, it almost looks so easy to like access a stored trauma, or it comes up. But I think this is
Mhm.
a fascinating topic. Like, how do you even know that you have stored trauma? Like, how, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
and I learned about this a lot through going to therapy. It's like when you're a kid, you have exactly what you were saying. You have like survival mechanisms
Yeah.
because you know you can't leave your abusive parents. You know you can't, you know, these are people in charge of feeding, caring,
They're
housing
taking
you.
care of you.
You can't
Yeah.
disappear on them, and you still form those love bonds, right? You still bond to
Mhm.
them because it's your survival is dependent on it. Um, but as a kid, like you know, you make certain adjustments that stay with you as an adult, and then that's the process of like taking care of adult you, right? Is looking at kid you and being like, okay, like I know little Chrissy was doing this because
Mhm.
she grew up in a house where she was tiptoeing around her dad and he drank a lot and everyone was afraid of making him mad. But as an adult, you realize, okay, I don't have to be afraid of like like male authority figures. I don't have to tiptoe around the men in my life. I can be honest, you know?
Yeah.
So that sounds like you work with a lot of that too, is like breaking those old childhood survival patterns.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example when you just said the tiptoeing around your dad. My husband has a very similar story actually, in that he had divorced parents. Dad was very different than mom. They both had their issues, but my husband Seth and I have permission to talk about his stuff. He would, like, as a child and a teenager, the stress response would engulf him the moment he would hear the garage door open. You
Oh
know,
man, that's
like,
interesting.
or the sound of the door. And you hear this from clients, like you can tell by the way a parent drops their keys, in that
If
front
they're
hallway,
pissed, right?
and if they slam
Oh,
this,
that's
or and so
fascinating.
what the kid does, I just got shivers thinking about this, is they don't even know they're doing it, Chrissy, because it's like a slug, when you touch a slug in the garden and it recoils.
Mhm.
It's like your entire system as a child, as a teenager, even as an infant, like even when you're a baby and you're not making sense of keys, loud voices, you can feel the energy. And if mother, let's just say, is afraid, or if it's the other way around, if the mother is the absolute, crazy one and the father is the submissive one, and isn't, it doesn't have to be the dad, right? I just need to be very clear with that. I've the stories of mothers and what they do is just atrocious as well. And so the little person, I don't even like the word adapts, they become malleable and they change not just their behavior, but their internal physiology. And
Wow.
so the survival response kicks up. So fight, heart goes up, oh, garage door. That flee energy comes in. Okay, I got to stop listening to the music. I have to clean up the kitchen,
That's
right?
so funny. I still do that shit. Like if someone opens a door or when I hear somebody coming downstairs, like I'm a grown ass woman. Like I
That's
still
how
feel like, oh, I'm about to
it's
be
a
like barged in on because like
uh-huh.
when we were growing up, like I shared a room with my sister, we could never
Yeah.
lock the door. If I locked the door, my dad would be like, bang, bang, bang. He would get so pissed. Like we had no
Mm,
privacy. Like it was
yeah,
and people would just be barging in on you on the bathroom at all. If you had a closed locked door, that was a new concept to me as an adult that you could
totally.
like close and lock your door.
Yeah, and it's your right to do that. Yeah. So you see how what happens is it's this fight flight energy, and then the human, the adult, the kid goes into what we would call, I call, my teachers call, functional freeze. And so in the wild, if an animal is frozen, they're like catatonic. They're completely stiff. You can't move them. And that's a
Because they're trying
survival
to
mechanism.
camouflage, right? They're trying to just,
It's
yeah.
a camouflage, and it's a protective. If that impala is about to be eaten by the cougar or whatever, or the lion or whatever it would be in the African savannah, you don't want to feel, the that's diving into your guts. And so you sedate yourself with this freeze and you actually become rigid. And so we have that too. Like a human can go catatonic into shock state. There's actually, when the Syrian refugee crisis was happening, and this is actually happening right now at the US border, I've seen photos of really young children who are asleep. It's called sleeping sickness. And they're asleep and they're trying to wake them up and they're like dead to the world. And their system
like checked out.
They're in complete shock because what's happening is just too terrifying and too confusing. So they're like that impala in the wild. They're just shutting down. What occurs though is, you weren't in a catatonic state in that bedroom with your sister. You were still doing your thing, but you had to be functional in your freeze. So the freeze was there, but it wasn't full blown.
Yeah, I would freeze like on the inside. Like I would freeze like kind of my feelings.
Yep.
And I noticed as like that was I'm still unpacking that as an adult. Like when I feel, I don't know, like overwhelmed, or if I feel someone's mad at me, if I feel someone's disapproval, like someone's upset with me, that could be anything from a normal like boss exchange to like a boyfriend. Like, oh, if I feel disapproval, then I feel like, because I confuse disapproval or an argument with someone being mad at me, and then I go like, I can't, sometimes I'll freeze because I'll be like, oh, I'm about to get, something bad is probably about to happen,
And that's an adaptive strategy. Like your system is preparing for death. Now that sounds extreme.
Damn, Irene.
But your system is literally preparing for death. And I want to make one point, because a lot of times you're like, oh, well, I didn't have a parent like Chrissy. I didn't have a parent like Irene's husband. I wasn't raped and abused like the client that I talked about. It could be being in surgeries as a young child. A lot of people don't realize, a baby comes out and say they have a defect or a heart problem or their foot is clubbed and they need to, the amount of surgeries that little people go through to protect their lives, save their lives. Dental things can be terrifying. And even surgeries, some of the classic ones are from having yourself be put under and the little child fighting because they're scared. Like, thankfully, hospitals are a bit better now, but back in the day, it was brutal. I still have a very vivid memory when I was 5, having my tonsils taken out, and the nurse, my parents left. This was like in 1980. They left the hospital, my room, and the nurse was like that classic, like whiskers on her face.
Oh,
white,
no.
was mean. And she took my little body and she flipped me onto my front, and I was wearing a gown. She pulled up my gown and she stabbed me in the butt with a sedative. And
wow.
And I remember, I don't remember.
She sounds like Nurse Ratched or something, like
terrible. And the memory of that is not, I can't feel it anymore, but it's something called an episodic memory. So it's there and you remember pieces of it, but you don't actually feel the pain. You just know it happened. And so that terror and that, like, where's my mom? No one's protecting me. Like that, those layers can go deep, and that can actually be, so your question a little while ago was, how does someone know if they have stored trauma? I have yet to meet anyone in the Western world who has not had something that they've experienced, had to push under, all down to like peeing your pants when you're in kindergarten because you weren't allowed to go to the bathroom, that, being humiliating, that kind of stuff. But the one way that we now know, and this is like actual research that's concluded this, is when there's adversity growing up, and lots of it, and you don't heal at this nervous system level, which the bulk of humanity has not, chronic illness sets in, mental illness, relationship troubles, autoimmune conditions, getting into toxic environments. And you are literally that person that walks down the dark alley and doesn't have the spidey senses kick up, right? And so your perception of danger, it's something called neuroception, or your perception of safety is totally, it's off.
Because in order to survive, you had to kind of accept a certain amount of danger, or like if you're like, maybe your spidey senses worked at first, but you're like, well, I'm not going to get through the day if I don't like handle a little bit of this
Yeah.
danger feeling, so you numb out, I guess.
Yeah, you numb out, and what happens, like, we need our survival impulses, right? Like, and I'll use a really simple example. If you're cutting food at the kitchen counter and you drop the knife and you know you're wearing bare feet,
You scoot your feet away. Yeah.
you're going to jump back reflexively. Just like if something's coming at you, you're going to do this. And then, bigger example, again, if someone is trying to attack you or hit you, you're going to automatically go into those fight, flight, freeze responses. The interesting thing is that fight, flight, freeze, it's governed by this thing called the autonomic nervous system, which is part of our nervous systems. That autonomic nervous system also governs our digestion, our immune system, our hormone health, our reproductive system, our cardiovascular system, the lymph flowing, but also, Chrissy, like how we engage. So if I start making funny faces to you and doing funny things, like, and you'll see it and you'll be like, what the heck is she doing?
Like if you meet somebody where you're like, oh, something in their body is not at peace, or like there's extra movements or struggle.
Well, here's the interesting thing. You hope you can attune to that and tell, but when you have that survival stuff literally stuck in your system in the many ways it can be, you don't have an accurate ability to read. But the interesting thing is some people become more tuned to that. People would call these folks empaths. I think everyone has some version of that, but they can tell because they had to listen to dad's footsteps coming up the stairs. So you can also have a really big superpower when you've had that kind of adversity, because you can tune to everyone. But the trouble is a lot of those folks fall into the camp of, I never want to go out because it's just too overwhelming because I feel everything.
Yeah, you feel other people's emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. And then some, it's the opposite. They're so shut down, they don't feel anything. And then those are the folks that will literally get themselves into trouble because they don't sense that that person is maybe a little shady. That makes sense?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think? And now we have, of course, like a generation of kids growing up, now a couple years masked up, who knows, like there a variety of however your parents are, like, and I hate to disparage parents who are like buying into all the propaganda, but maybe the parents are like, they've had loss, they've had grandparents die, they've had real reason to fear the pandemic, right? People close to them have gotten real sick. Maybe they're like so anal, so all about the mask, too much sanitization, and it's like ranging from, you have parents that are very like red pilled and awake, and they're like, okay, well, maybe they haven't had anyone close to them die, and they're like, this is basically the flu with a better publicist, and go out, play, see your friends, and I know that there are some examples of kids that I know, like because they are friends with my boyfriend's son, who's like 10, and I'm like, wow, there's some of these kids I haven't seen in a year and a half, 2 years, and like, so what are you thinking is going to be like? And I know every generation has its its thing, right? Like for me growing up, it was like, oh, I don't want to wear this damn helmet, and then you throw it off. But like, so I know that these kids growing up, they're going to have this thing probably when they get a little older, like, oh, fuck these masks. Like they'll either be not about it or they will stay with that sort of like anal retentiveness. Like, what are your thoughts on how the pandemic is going to affect kids and teens growing up? And I'm sure adults too are experiencing trauma from this.
I've been asked this, and there's no one answer because everyone is so different. I do feel that we're going to see some really interesting things come out of this in 12 years, 20 years, 5 years, when the children of now are going into puberty, and I can't say what's going to occur, but what I do know is that, here, I'll give you an example. So I live near lots of beautiful forests and trees. And so we walk a lot in the forest and by the ocean. And I was starting to tell, I don't know, time is just totally warped right now, but sometime last year, I could tell by about 30 feet from a family coming towards me where they stood with what's going on.
Oh man, I love doing that. Yeah.
And it's not like, it's
Mhm.
not even about a judgment. It's just the body language, the
You
way they
feel
would
it.
slow down. I'm just an innocent bystander walking with my husband on a forest walk, and some just would keep walking, and others would slow down, and you would see them start to veer. And again, it was my biggest meditation, Chrissy, to just be okay with that and respect it. But what really, this is what angered me and pissed me off, is a lot of the kids, I can cry thinking about it right now, they would stop, they would turn their bodies, and they would hold their breath.
Oh man, see
And
that's
I'm not exaggerating.
I
Like, this
feel
was,
that too. Like adults, you can make up your mind, you can change at any time, but like you are imprinting these kids to be afraid of air.
and at age 3, it won't work, because I was in a few lineups last summer where some toddlers were in line with me, behind me, not mine, and the mother would keep apologizing because the kid kept coming close to me, and I looked like, it's okay, I'm not worried, like, don't worry, it's fine. And at that age, they just don't really get it. But the moment you become kind of 5-ish, something changes. And so when I see a little 5-year-old, 6, 7, 8, even the teenagers, I'm like, that is not going to just go away. It's going to stick with them. And I don't know how that's going to impact, but we could trace it back. Basically, they're afraid of human contact. They're afraid of the air.
Mm-hmm.
So
Strangers. Yeah.
put all the pandemic stuff aside. If we just look at it from a pure survival-based perspective, that little kid, once healthy, with no, let's just assume that they're not being beaten, traumatized, and dad isn't scary with his feet walking into the house. Let's just say it's a happy household to the degree that it can be. You've just taken a very healthy kiddo and now implanted a survival stress into them, which will impact the rest of their physiology. And the
Wow.
interesting thing that I see now, Chrissy, is a lot of parents will be walking on the streets and they won't have a mask on, and the children will.
I've seen that too. It makes no sense. Kids
Well,
are not, being affected from this. It's like, but
here's
they're
my
easier to
question.
control.
Do you see it in mainly kids kind of like 6 to 13-ish? Because
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So at that point, that child, this is again just my speculation, knowing what I know, it's a way for them to differentiate themselves from the parent. And especially the teenagers will be
That's
like,
really interesting.
screw you, like, I'm going to do what I want. And I saw this when I was in my training with nutrition. I had one dietetics professor who said a lot of girls are vegetarian, not because they are
That was
vegetarian.
me at 8. I was like, "Fuck you, dad."
Yeah.
Like, I saw an episode of The Simpsons, and I was like, "You
Oh
know
my
what? I
God.
like animals." But I
Yeah.
knew it was gonna be a pain in the ass for them. So I mean, I
You did
eventually
it.
dropped it, but,
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
feel that motivation.
Yeah. I'll never forget, my professor said it's a way for a teenager or a child to emancipate themselves from their family. It's a control. And then they'll go out with, and these are just her words exactly, and then they'll go out with their friends on the weekend and have a Big Mac, right? And but
That's
that's what
great.
I think is happening
Mhm.
with, I mean, the kids, their choice and again, they don't understand. They're just seeing the signaling around them. And
Right.
at that age, you're like a sponge and you want to fit in. You want to fit in. And so you're going to do what the masses are doing, because that's just how we're programmed to want to belong.
Yeah, we
And at
wanna
that
blend in.
age, yeah, at that age, it's hard to be a black sheep. It's very hard to be a black sheep, And so anyway, I don't know what's going to occur. I'm worried about the infants
Hmm.
who are with family members who are keeping their masks on. I'm
Oof.
very worried about that, because this face of ours, we haven't gotten into the science, but one portion of the autonomic nervous system is called the parasympathetic. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Okay. So the parasympathetic nervous system, it slows things down, but it's more complex than that. One portion is not fully built when we're born. And it's the portion that can engage and that can calm our heart down. And so when a baby comes out, they can't self-regulate their heart. They need to be held. They need to be,
Oh,
right?
that's
They need,
why. Oh,
yeah, they're completely immature animals. Like we're humans, but we're also animals. So when they come out, granted they're full term and healthy, they can poop and pee, no problem. They want to eat. So that portion of their parasympathetic is on, the digestion and everything. But it's called the ventral vagal. It's just a part of the vagus nerve. But if you don't get that, you aren't going to be able to pick up cues. And part of that nerve goes directly to the heart and directly to the pacemaker of the heart, something called
wow.
the SA node. And so if you don't get that nice, yummy facial cue connection that the mother is like, it's
Yeah,
okay.
validation, love,
It's okay.
happiness.
Like,
You're like, oh,
yeah,
this everything's safe. Yeah, I
yeah,
feel
like, yeah, you
good.
got some gas in your belly, but it's okay. We're going to hold you. But Elvie, if all you see are these beady little eyes staring at you,
You're
you're
missing
not
like
going to,
2/3 of the face, honestly, like,
yeah. I just watched the remake. I just rewatched The Matrix the other night. Do you remember? I'm assuming you've seen that.
yeah, I haven't seen
Okay.
it recently, but yeah.
It's been a while. I rewatched it. I felt it was time. But there was a point at the very beginning where Keanu Reeves, was being interrogated by the bad guys, and they sealed his face. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, do they, like, wipe his mouth away or they seal
Basically,
it
it's like,
off?
it's really interesting effects, and he's trying to talk,
That's so
and
scary.
it's kind of weird. And I looked at him like, he looks really strange without a mouth, And I know that they were doing it about silencing him and not allowing him to speak. But when you look at a face without a mouth and without cheeks, eyes don't really change very much.
You can smize, but, like,
They
not everyone
dilate.
not
Anyway,
everybody can smize. Yeah, you're right. It's, your eyes can only express so much, and, like,
oh,
your eyes can be expressive, but when you take the rest of the face in context.
meant to be together. Anyway, we'll see. I mean, let's talk in another 12 years, but
We'll have to reconvene.
yeah.
And, you talk about a lot, like, what people can do now. Um, this is such a time of fear and stress, like, whether you see through the lies of the propaganda, whether you see through, "Okay, this is just Colbert being bought out by Big Pharma. He doesn't
Right.
really think we should dance with jabs." Even if
Yeah, that
you're
was weird.
smart and on top of it and you can see what's happening, you still are being inundated with, like, fear and stress because other people around you are afraid and stressed.
Mhm.
And what are some things, I guess, that we can do or, you know, to kind of cultivate like calm and peace in our lives, like there's so much we don't have control over, right? And a lot
Yeah.
of a lot of people feel hopeless. I mean, the
Mhm.
there's so much depression, everything, you know, people are dying of this, but even more people are feeling, depression, right? Suicidal, right? They're
Mhm.
on varying degrees of unemployment, afraid they're going to lose their jobs. There's so much to be
Oh,
like
it's
afraid and
huge.
stressed about, like, and people, I'm beginning to hate the term self-care just because it's so overused and it's become like commodified and sort of like Instagramified, like, oh, here's me in a bathtub. Although I do love taking baths,
Oh,
but
I love my
like,
baths.
what are some things people can do? And also, like, what are some ways that there's probably I think a lot of people probably don't know that they're stressed or don't know that
Mhm.
because we're just go,
Mhm.
go, go. You got to work, you got a family to
Mhm.
take care of. Just like you said
Mhm.
before, we don't all have the luxury of healing our childhood wounds because we have to go to work still. We got to, like, go take care of grandma. But what are some ways that, like, you
Yeah.
can discover that you're holding something and then, I know that I just asked you like 4 questions,
Yeah,
but
it's okay. Well, I think that yeah, there is a lot of stress right now. Like, yes. And it was already, in my opinion, from being in this world for as long as I have, it was already there. And now it's been kind of catapulted to a different level. And I say, you don't have to mold and merge with that,
mm,
no matter what you believe, right? So, yes, we don't have control about all the things that are happening that are just too numerous to even begin with. But you do have control about listening to your body. So one of the things that I would say is, if you know that you're struggling with your immune system, not because of current day situation, but just you get sick easy, or your cuts don't heal very well, or let's say your gut, your poops aren't very good, or they're weird and irregular, or let's just say you have a hormone problem, like your doctor said, you have a thyroid problem or whatever, or that you're afraid to whatever, so let's just say you're like, yep, I think I have some of that. We call it dysregulation of the nervous system. I go into too much fight, flight. I lose it when I shouldn't. Or let's just say a bit more of what you said, Chrissy, like I shut down when a difficult thing happens. I feel my body numbing out, and there's no real threat around me.
You'll just be like, oh, I have 5 things to do today. Why am I shutting down?
So
yeah.
Let's just say there's something there. This is going to sound really weird, but one of the more basic things I teach my students when I work with them is to follow their biological impulse. Now, what that means to listen to the physiologies within your body, like when you do have to go to the bathroom. The amount of people I have talked to and met who will hold their bladders forever, like they know they have to go pee.
From different jobs. I had a job where I had to call somebody to relieve me because I was a front desk receptionist, and she would never come. So over the period of a year, I just sort of was like, oh, well, I'm never gonna get to pee at work. So I stopped drinking water so that I would be better at work. It's whack.
So, it sounds crazy, but that is an entryway, I should say, into the autonomic nervous system. And when you can start to listen at your bowels, the gas, again, like how many times are we taught when you burp or fart, you have to say, excuse me, pardon me, I'm sorry.
Or hold it in, don't ever do it in front of people.
Yeah, even in front of our partners, we won't. I mean, I'm not like that, but a lot of people won't even pee with the bathroom door open, that kind of thing. It's like, in the wild, an animal is they're not thinking, I have to pet, like cows in a pasture. They're not thinking about the poop that's dropping out of their bums.
You see that video of the gorillas at the Bronx Zoo going down on each other in front of all the kids are all like, ah! The parents are like, don't look.
Oh my God, I haven't seen that.
It's hilarious. I have to send it to you.
They
don't care, right?
Okay, so let's contextually, no, maybe we don't do that on the subway kind of thing, right? But there are these little things like that, like when you're thirsty, are you having something liquid to drink? When you're hungry, are you eating? When you're not hungry, are you eating? I mean, as simple as those things are, if you ask a person to just monitor that for a couple of weeks, they might realize, wow, I am really not in tune. And what they tend to find is, as they get more tuned to that, they start to feel their other sensations, the emotions. Because remember what I said, that autonomic nervous system is governing the digestion. It's one of the easiest ones for us to connect to. Same with the breath. I'm not a big proponent of breath work per se, because we need to notice our breath and listen to what it's doing. If we think about that client I mentioned who was strapped to trees, when she walked in, she had no clue that she was holding her breath when she moved to sit or lay down. And so rather than saying to her, breathe, 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 I just said, can you just notice that you don't do that, and see what would happen if you just allowed your body to do what it wants to do.
Wow.
And so it's using the cognitive, because we've got this higher brain, right? We're not like the chimps or the gorillas in the zoo. We do have a higher level of brain that can consciously notice, I am not breathing. I'm holding in my bladder. I'm clenching whatever, my guts, because of whatever. I can actually change that. And so, to go back to your question, how does this relate to the stress of the world? It does, in that what you're doing is you're helping your body become more listened to by you. You're tuning to it more. And when you tune to it more, let's just say you're so sad about what's going on. You're hearing what we're talking about with the kids, what's making you angry. Those emotions need to move out. But a lot of times people don't even know they're floating in the body because they don't even know how to listen to these basic body processes. So classic kind of stress health people, it's like, just meditate and just breathe and just have a cup of tea. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but it's not getting into that unconscious, juicy physiology that we don't even think about. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's like, I don't know if it was one of your videos, but I saw somebody talk about how like if an animal like just gets away with his life or something, like he'll shake it out because he physically has to move the trauma out of his body. And that's why I love crying. If I feel like I need to cry, I'm like, bring it. Cause it's like it's either I feel like with women, you're either crying or you're hitting somebody or you're slashing some tires. Like you gotta move those feelings out.
I'm going to correct you on one thing, because this is actually a misconception. So when that animal isn't eaten and it gets away, the shake, it isn't the trauma that it's releasing. What it's releasing is the survival stress that needs to get out.
Oh, like the adrenaline or like whatever it needed to get through?
It's just like, it's the extra bit of, I need to get this energy and adrenaline and the movements out. What will happen if you don't allow that animal to do that is then it becomes traumatized.
Okay.
So that's like, if we think of like animals in the zoo that aren't being allowed to hunt and kill, and they're just being given, like, they're not releasing and realizing their true innate peace. It's like with, you know, if you think about, you can have two people who get into the exact same car accident, for example. One person walks away and they're fine, and they really are fine, maybe a sore neck, but they're fine. Another person walks away and they're riddled with PTSD. And so it's less about the event, but how that physiology is equipped to deal with it. And a lot of that, Chrissy, goes back to how you were raised as a kiddo.
Yeah.
Were you allowed, like when you fell off your bike, were you allowed to cry? Or did the parents say, get up, not that bad at all, don't cry? It's like, well, actually, it really hurts when you fall off of your bike and you scrape a knee. It's not about not teaching a child to build resilience, but let them get that energy out and then let them get back on the bike and do it again. But don't stop that process, because what happens is you store that inside, and then they're going to be disconnected from themselves and the environment, and they're more prone to get into an accident again. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And you talk a lot about toxic shame, and that there's two different kinds of shame. There's like a positive shame, and then there's a negative shame. Could you elaborate on that a little?
So toxic and healthy. And this is going to be kind of like a mind twist for some who have really followed, say, Brene Brown's work that says all shame is bad. And that when you're shamed, you're being told that you are wrong. Whereas guilt is, I've done something wrong.
It's just the behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the way to explain it. I got to give you examples. So when I was really little, I was old enough to cut something at the kitchen counter, and I had a knife, and it was like turned to my face, not this close, but like down there. I was cutting something. I don't remember what it was. And my dad was sitting at the kitchen table, and I heard this big baritone voice say, Irene, turn the knife the other way. You're going to hurt yourself. It was direct. It was calculated, and it kind of shook me. I was like, oh, right. I'm a little kid. I'm learning, right? And so I did, and I cut, and I was fine. To this day, Chrissy, if I'm tired, because we're all tired sometimes, and I'm like cutting the avocado, with the knife, it's like, shit, I shouldn't be doing that. It's that feeling that my dad imparted into my body viscerally that reminds me, turn the knife the other way, be careful. That is an example of an outside energy influencing my body so I don't hurt myself. It's a right from wrong. Now, let's just say my dad came up to me and was like, honey, that's not right. Don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself, like in a real sweet, compassionate, that isn't going to land.
And
so,
because it sounds like most other types of communication, it's like it doesn't stand out.
It doesn't stand out. So when there is a healthy shame dosed out, it's how it registers in your physiology of danger. And if you have dogs, they've done something wrong, they've like eaten something, their tail, like they know.
Oh, they know, right? They know. It's like, whose poop is this? It's like, it's your poop.
They know. Their ears kind of go back.
They're
and
like,
their tail goes under. And that's the shame. Like that's the response. And so it's interesting because both my parents are veterinarians when I was growing up. And so they both grew up on farms. So when you're around animals, you actually learn, if you're good with animals, how to shame them in a healthy way to train them, essentially.
Aww.
But it isn't about beating them. It's about strong, stern, and then, okay, come here, and you rub their ears and you pet them, and then everything's fine. It's the same with humans. So that would be an example of healthy shame. And here's the interesting thing. When it's done well, you don't have to keep doing it again and again. Toxic shame would be cutting the thing with my knife. Irene, you're such an idiot. Like, stop it. What are you stupid? Like, it would be this sharp, curt, toxic, like jab of bullets to your personal capacity of just being a human
without necessarily like a correction. Yeah.
It's not a correction. It's like, you're an idiot, you're stupid, you're wrong, you're being wrong. And so it has a different energy. And so, for instance, my husband had that growing up, whereas I had this, my traumas came from other things, right? So that would be an example of toxic shame. And the thing is the moment that occurs, you still have that tail under, but then it gets connected with a deeper sense of, I am rotten. I'm a rotten person. And an interesting thing, because I need to put it in here, is one of the ways to heal that kind of toxic shame. We can't get to it with talk therapy. We can't even just get to it with movement therapy. We have to understand the emotion disgust. So one of the basic human emotions and mammalian emotions is disgust. We have fear, anger, sadness, joy, anger, surprise, and disgust. And it's that distaste of, ugh, this doesn't taste good. And what it is it's experiencing what was done to me was gross. And this is very common with folks who have been abused sexually. It's gross. You feel gross. And even with medical procedures, this is a very big one. Like, you feel deep shame because your body was messed with and you had no control over it. And so I say that because sometimes people will start a healing practice. So maybe they are doing a yoga practice and they're opening up that spine from this position, or they're doing an exercise. It doesn't matter. It could be anything. And all of a sudden they feel this desire to like retch.
Wow.
And it's visceral. And a lot of times people they won't understand, oh, did I eat something wrong? Like, what, this must not be the right thing to do.
But you open up like a heart center, and then so it's
heart,
like,
yeah. And that yuckiness is like stored in the guts and in the collapsed body. And then when you start to open up the system, these things start to come out. And so this is where education and people understanding, like in the wild, we don't worry about that because you're just doing your thing and this is just not happening. Humans are really weird in that we have all these different rules, these different cultures, these different societal whatever, from children are meant to be seen and not heard, to the way that we abuse our kids because we were probably abused ourselves. And so it's just this like craziness and chaos of all these things. But that I had to put in that disgust piece because it's often not talked about, but it is one of the gateway emotions to healing that toxic shame. And then just to follow up the guilt thing, because people be like, oh, well, that's guilt. Guilt is a much more advanced quality. It's more of a thought-based thing. Like, I break my husband's favorite mug, I'm going to feel guilty. Right? You have to understand it in a different way, consequences. A 3-year-old can't understand guilt because they're not cognitively online yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's why they do so many of their behaviors. Like, you should feel guilty about this. You just shat down my sweater, and you're like, what? Because you're trying to like survive first. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's I don't know if that answers the question about the shame. It's one of the most misunderstood pieces because it's not an emotion. It's a quality that you feel viscerally as a result of how you were treated. So it's very nuanced, but it's absolutely in the somatic physiology.
And so I wonder now, what are going to be the effects of like now it feels like, and I don't know where you stand on like jabs, but like I feel like there is like a cultural shame being put upon people who, for whatever reason, don't want to get it. Like, and it's like we all know all the reasons that people don't get it. So and I just feel like everything in our culture is telling, you know, me, because I'm one of those people too. Like you just feel shame every day, and I mean, it depends like how much regular TV you're watching and mainstream media, but they definitely like the point is to shame those who haven't gotten it yet. Why haven't you? You're putting everyone at danger. A lot like so many other reasons that actually make no sense and aren't really, you know, backed by science.
Yep.
It's interesting. Like to me, that seems toxic, and I feel like there's a way. It feels like things are kind of messed up. You know, like kids are not being healthy shamed into growing into tall, strong, tall, you know, good adults. But it's like in some senses, there's no shame because it's almost like. Oh, you have to be so accepting to the point where you're letting unhealthy patterns and behaviors develop. It just seems like a lot.
It is a lot. And what I'm seeing is people are wanting to choose to say not be jabbed, and they don't want it. And they know, but then the pressure, and that breaks my heart because I've now know people who regret having it because they've gotten really sick. And this is just personal, anecdotal. You know, I'm not saying what you should and shouldn't do by any means, but I've watched this peer pressure on really intelligent adults whom I love, and it breaks my heart. And again, I'm just speculating here, but my sense, Chrissy, is a lot of that ties into their unhealed wounds from when they were brought up. Because I'm not, and there's nothing in my body that is ever going to succumb to someone screaming at me because of my choice. And it's like, no. And I know myself pretty damn well. I've done a lot of work, and it's solid, it's strong. And I also know how to look at the science from an academic point of view. And I've looked at enough to say, this is just too unknown. And I'm sorry if you think it's not even, I'm sorry. It's like, this is what I know. And what I know is what I know. What you know is what you know. And if you were, again, I'll get a little heated with this, but if you were okay with everything that you did, then you wouldn't mind. Like, why does it matter? But again, it goes back into that massive psychological operation that is beyond our comprehension.
And you think the government must know, like they must have such a good like handle on like human behavior, right? Like think of all the psyops that have happened over time, and they must know like exactly, okay, if we pressure people in this way, if we shame them in this way, if we use kind of like peer pressure from other friends and family, we will get this, we will attack and get this last segment of the population that could be turned, right? There's those of us that will not be turned. Like I'm the same way. Like I feel like I've done a lot of work on myself, and I see what they're doing, and I go, okay, like, and I've had it, and I have natural immunity. So it's like, I also can put that feather in my cap, even though if I never gotten it, I would still be like, no, thanks. Cause I was just talking to a friend in Australia, and we all know Australia's a shit show right now. He was like, you know, he had held out a year and a half, not going to get it, but he finally like, literally he said like caved because he was like, you know, you just think, oh, I'm not gonna be able to do anything. I'm not gonna be able to like have a you know, a regular life, because you think that how things are right now are how they will always be, and I refuse to accept that.
It's not true. I don't believe that's true. I think that's why I rewatched The Matrix for a little crazy twisted sanity the other night. Was and And Australia is an interesting one because I have strong ties there. I lived there for a couple of years. One of my best friends is deep in Sydney in the thick of this. That was the one country, Chrissy, where it's going to sound crazy, the only time in my life I didn't feel safe.
Oh, I feel like Australia is in deep with like the globalist deep state. I don't know. I just feel like from the things I've read, I just feel like
I mean, I have nothing to confirm or deny anything. All I know is what I felt when I lived there. And I'm going to say this because it was really interesting. I mean, I love Australia. I miss being there. I miss being able to go there. I was supposed to teach there a year ago, and then everything had to get canceled. But when I was there, I was on a subway one day in broad daylight, and I'm very strong in my resolve. Like I go down dark alleys and I'm fine and I can hold my own. I've driven through New York, subway system in New York, Paris, London, Rome, no problem. But I was on the subway, broad daylight, and a group of rugby guys got on the train and they were very drunk. And I felt a little bit of a panic, which I had never felt before. And if we look at the history of Australia with that it being a penal colony, people were being transported there, because they were criminals from Europe and the Commonwealth. And then the people that had to go there to take care of them probably didn't want to go there. And it's a harsh country, water is not plentiful in Australia. Natural resources are very different. Yes, it's beautiful. There's lots of tropical fruit and all that, but it's also very dry and very barren. But there's an edge there. And my Aussie colleagues will say this. I was in a training there assisting in a trauma training a couple of years ago. I was the only Canadian, I was the only North American that had lived there. The other assistants were all American. And we were doing these group sessions with the Aussie students who were all lovely people. They're psychologists and counselors and yoga instructors. And we watched in the course of a day, groups of pods of 3 people fighting and being mean to each other in an exercise that normally in North America would just be fine. It would be a little heated, but we got together at the end of that day and we had our debrief, and the trainer was like, so what the hell just happened today? Like, I've never seen that in a training. And had trained a lot of people in America and Canada. And and I just kind of looked around and I'm like, is anybody going to say anything? And the Aussies that were there who were learning how to assist said, well, there's a lot of stored rage in this country.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
There's a lot of stored up anger and aggression. And there are, and I kind of was like, hey, thank you. I didn't have to say it. You guys said it, but it's true. Like we needed more foundational work. We needed to help them build a bit more capacity before we put them in. I don't even remember what the exercise was. They didn't have the tools to even sense the bubbling up. And it just came out behaviorally, kind of like a kid having a tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
The kid that has a tantrum isn't because they're trying to be an asshole. It's because they have got so much fight flight in their body that they don't know how to control it because they're little. And so here we are with these professional adults. And it just exploded. And so I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day who's actually a Marine in the States, and he's watching what's going on in Australia. He's like, I just don't understand, Irene. How could law enforcement be so brutal to the people? Like, oh, it makes complete sense to me. I've lived there. I've sat in rooms feeling this energy. And then there'll be those that just are submissive because of their treatment over their generations and their ancestry. And then there'll be those who were the ones that maybe didn't want to be there. And so they're just pissed. And so it's like this perfect storm, right?
Yeah. And it
anyway,
helps.
That was a bit of a tangent.
No, that's really fascinating, because when you think, we've all heard the term like generational anger, generational pain, the fact that a whole country can have, because of its roots, some stored trauma, right? And of course, those families that have been there over generations, you pass that on to your kids, right? We all have unexamined traumas. We, you try not to, but some of us pass it on to our children, because your kids are sponges and they pick up like, okay, what do I need to adjust to here?
Yeah.
It helps me have a little bit more empathy because these people literally feel like this reaction is equal to the threat that they're experiencing, and their survival is the only way they can survive is by reacting in kind, or the cop that does like beat the shit out of somebody who is just outside their house.
Well, they're not in their higher brain, right? And that's the thing. This is why I say the stress was there before this all happened, because that just doesn't come in for the heck of it when something tragic occurs globally, from what I can tell. And, a colleague of mine was saying, she's in Melbourne. She was walking outside of a grocery store, and she wasn't wearing a mask because they still have to wear masks outside there. And she's exempt. And she even has a doctor's thing that says, I'm exempt. A woman attacked her like broad daylight in the parking lot, left her children in the car to attack my colleague.
Whoa.
I was like, first of all, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But we were talking about it, and I said, listen, that woman is deeply, deeply unwell, and she probably doesn't even know consciously that she's doing it. It is a survival mechanism to fight what she has been told is a danger.
Mm-hmm.
And common sense, well, if you do believe that person is a threat, going closer to them is going to be worse. So just let her be and drive away with your children. But I saw that kind of behavior, Chrissy, even when I was living there in 2000 and 2008, the few years I was there. I saw mothers vocally screaming at their children, just crossing the street, calling them little shits. I'll never forget. I was stopped in my car one day in this little tiny ocean town, and this mother she looked so haggard. I mean, she just didn't look well. And she had these two little girls. No one was wearing shoes, because often people don't wear shoes in Australia by the beach. And she just pulled on this little kid's, just like, come on, you little shit, don't do that. And it just, the harshness.
Wow.
And so again, it's like a lot of this, I believe, was already there.
They were primed for it.
Got put into a pressure cooker. And so it's quite sad. I mean, it's just sad that that's happening and people aren't even aware that it's occurring.
Yeah. And at the same time, like you talk about anger being like a powerful thing to listen to, a lot of us are raised, oh, don't be angry. Don't react. And like anger is important. Just like your emotions are so important. They tell you what to pay attention to.
They're connected to our immune system. Like anger is an interesting one, because someone might be saying, oh, well, that woman was just being angry. And I'm like, no, there's a difference between anger and violence. And being abusive. So anger is like, like in the comfort of your own home or in your car or outside, like, damn, like, and I'm not going to do it because I'll screw the sound, but it's like screaming, or it's it's feeling that impulse inside and not hurting yourself or your stuff or another person or your dog or your cat, because that happens. It's like getting that energy out, but it has to connect to the impulse inside that's building. This is why a lot of cathartic practices where you just hit a pillow for the sake of hitting a pillow, it's not enough.
That's why axe throwing is really taken off.
Throwing archery and all these things, shooting guns. I mean, those are all skills that I think are important to have, but there is this misunderstanding that anger can be quite medicinal when used properly. It can also set boundaries. But the moment it harms you or other people, it transfers into toxic behavior.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And there's so much connection between stored aggression and anger and things like cancer, especially in women.
Totally. Like I swear, like my mom got cancer and I just look, I mean, nobody's perfect, but like she drank a
No.
ton of diet soda.
Oh
We
yeah.
were born and raised growing up on Long Island. I know they did tons of chemical testing out there, like what in the 40s or something, because
For
so
sure.
many of the teachers in her school district got cancer. But
Yeah.
also like a lifetime of not being able to truly express herself to my dad, like not being able to be like, hey, don't talk to me like that, or like, hey, I mean, he wasn't like beating her or anything, but like they just fought a
No.
lot and they weren't kind to each other, and like, and that was my model of like how to be a woman. It's like,
Emotions.
don't stand up for yourself, tiptoe
Yeah.
around, do what you want quietly in secret away from the men,
Mhm.
like you have to get away with everything.
Well,
And
it's
I
like
feel
what
like
you.
a lot of our
Yeah.
emotions were repressed.
Have you ever seen the movie Revolutionary Road?
No.
Oh, that one's good. Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio. It's like New York in the 50s. And there was like the suburbia life. And then he took the train in to like be the guy making the money in the city. I don't want to give it away because it's not the nicest ending, but um, it's an example of the mental health of that generation and just not expressing. It's also in a newer show. Oh gosh, it's about the space race between Russia and the U.S. with
Oh,
Joel
okay.
Kinnaman. He's quite a upcoming actor. It'll come to me. But that show, if I have a training ever to teach people how to do my work, I will be showing parts of that show to show how repression occurs, but then how a tragedy can actually break open the emotions. It's
Which
my
is
husband
what
was
which explains all the like anyone you see someone like unhinged by the last year and a half, it's
like
like,
totally, and it's like my husband saw it and he's like, that was probably the best show I've ever watched
ooh, okay,
ever.
message when we're done, message it to me. I wanna put it in the details
I'll
of
look it
the
up right now. But yeah, that one's just good. It's more modern, more not modern, but more how shall you say, rendition of For All Mankind. That's what it is.
okay.
For All Mankind.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah,
And,
it's
we got an
really
interesting
good.
comment here from
Oh,
Justin. "I'm in Adelaide, Australia, and I'm
mm,
7th generation Aussie, and I can easily say that the pent-up anger in most Aussies is from the government overreach and just getting involved in every way to them." That's
that's
very
really
interesting.
interesting. When I was at university there, I was in Wollongong, which is just outside of Sydney. And one of my best friends, who's a professor, older, she said, we're not a country, we're an economy.
Ooh.
And basically it was this, we're not treated well. And even when I was doing my research, the health of the Australian people was so bad. When I was there, the obesity rates were higher in Australia than in America. I don't know what it's like now.
How dare somebody beat us in
I know,
obesity?
I
Oh
know. It
my
might, it
god.
might be different, but my other professor, who was in exercise science, he said the Australian government pumped so much money to sport and getting us, high up in sport to kind of conquer that world, that the money didn't go to the regular people to help them improve their health, and then everything just declined.
It's when you think of
So
like North Korea, how they
mm,
like, they have like their certain area that visitors can visit, that everything looks like that it's great, but then just
oh,
over the
it's
fence
tragic.
is like poverty and
I've
yeah.
been listening to some podcasts with that defector.
Yes, I've been meaning to try to get her on. She's so interesting and
She's
like
so sweet.
beautiful and what a
I
soul.
Yeah, I watched her Rogan one and also with Jordan Peterson, and I just was like, wow, you are a stellar human being to even have, like, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, she's definitely, I feel like, on a mission from God, like it's
Kindred
you're like, how
spirit.
did people get through this?
Mhm.
Irene, we will have to do this again. There's just so
Yeah.
much to talk about with you. You're such a wealth of
Oh,
knowledge, and this has been such an interesting conversation. But I know you have to run. Before you go, tell people where they can find you and follow you and check out
yeah.
your work.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on, and it's been fun. So yes, let's do it again. Just my name. So Irene Lyon with a Y, no S, is how you find me. There, all the social is there. I've got a YouTube channel with hundreds of videos that are apparently binge worthy, which is saying
Ooh,
a
yeah,
lot.
they are. I've been watching them.
And then just oodles of free resources, downloads, so you can get into some of the practices. And then, of course, I have courses, and it's my job, right? So I have some paid programs, and I'm on Instagram, so see me there. But yeah, just go to the site. Don't be overwhelmed because there's a lot there. Start with one thing and just keep at it. And the other thing I will say, Chrissy and everyone else, if you've been here listening and something's like kind of triggered into you, because it may have, because we talked a lot about a lot of things, and you're feeling something physically, that's very normal. So don't ignore it. Like if you're feeling a need to like go for a walk or take a shower, even though it's the middle of the day, or you're like, I got to cancel my next appointment, or I need to go eat French fries, or whatever it is, just listen to that impulse and treat yourself to what you need. Because even just hearing this information can start something unfolding and unleashing. So I just want to, I'm trying to put that out there as much as I can when I do these talks.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, pay attention to those little impulses, like not if your impulse is like go eat a whole cake, but like
yeah, I mean, you got to be, I actually have had some clients that have lost weight by doing nothing but eating baked goods for like a month.
What?
Don't do that. Please don't do that. Unless that's a craving, but because they just deprive themselves of so much. And so they knew going into it, I'm not going to do this forever, but it was like, it was the rule of how she grew up, was like, you're not allowed to have anything sweet. And so there was just, and we tend to overcompensate. Anyway, so yeah.
That's so interesting.
It is interesting.
Irene, it was so great to chat. I'll definitely have you back. Thank you guys for the comments and interesting questions in the chat. And until next time, bye.